Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. Welcome to this webinar today. This is actually the third webinar in a series that we've been doing about community and belonging and support in higher education. For those of you that participated in some of the earlier webinars, you'll know that the first two really focused around students, student belonging, and some practical ways that we can build community among our students. But today we wanted to take a slightly different approach and talk about one of the other major stakeholders and really important components of education, which is our faculty. And not overlooking them, but also thinking about what are some things that we can do to help build community and connection for them, and why that's so important today more than ever. I want to thank one of our sponsors, WGU Labs, who has helped us put this webinar series on. And this webinar is also sponsored by my company, which is InScribe, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we do during the introductions. I also want to introduce a couple of folks from my team who are here today. Anna and Danielle, they will be kind of moderating what's happening in the chat and the Q&A area. So if you see them jump in and say hello or answer questions, know that they come from our team and are here to help make everything run really smoothly today. So if we go to the next slide. Well, before we jump to this, then I'll do a little bit more housekeeping. So first of all, we would really like to make this an interactive conversation. So, many of you that are attending today are also experts in this area or have questions or ideas. So we're going to have a couple of places where we put questions out to the attendees. Please use the chat function. So if you're familiar with Zoom or not, if you look toward the bottom of your screen, you'll see some controls there, one of which is the chat. If you click on that, it'll pop it up and you can post your thoughts and comments there. We also have a separate Q&A area. So if you have a specific question that you want the panelists to address, you can post it in that Q&A space. But we'll be monitoring both areas, so don't stress about it too much. We are also recording this webinar, so we will send a follow-up afterward where we will include this recording. And for those of you that weren't able to make the earlier webinars, we'll include links to some resources and content from those webinars, again, focused a little more around students as well. So just to introduce myself, my name is Katie Kapler. I am your moderator for today, and I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called InScribe. So InScribe is a digital community platform that helps higher education institutions foster connection among students and faculty, especially for those folks who are working and learning at a distance. We care a lot about faculty support and faculty community and have some great examples of where some of our customers have been deploying that. And I'll find opportunities to kind of weave those in along as we talk. If you want to learn more, please feel free to reach out to us either after the webinar. So joining me today, I'm excited to say I have two great panelists. Alison Bell, who is the Chancellor of WGU Indiana, which is the state's online competency-based university. Alison has more than 20 years of experience in higher education leadership, with 4 years of prior work at WGU as the general manager of WGU Indiana. That was from 2010 to 2014. But before returning to WGU, Alison served as the Director of Degree Completion at Indiana University, Purdue University in Indianapolis, where she led operations and supervised the academic coaching and career staff. Alison has a BA in psychology from Indiana University and an MA in student personnel administration in higher education from Ball State University. And also with us today is Richard Badenhausen, who is the founding dean of the Honors College at Westminster. He is a leader in the National Honors community and a two-time member of the National Collegiate Honors Council, which is the NCHC, Board of Directors, and a recommended site visitor there, an editorial board member of HIP, which is Honors in Practice, and past co-chair of the NCHC Publication Board. He is currently serving as the immediate past president of NCHC, which has over 800 honors programs and college members around the country and throughout the world. Richard regularly visits campuses to help consult on how schools can improve their honors programs and colleges. Right now, he's teaching a seminar in humanities, war literature, theories of place and trauma studies, and is the recipient of the 2014 Gore Excellence in Teaching Award and two-time winner of the Westminster's Shaw Award for Scholarship. So great panelists today. We're really excited. Welcome, Alison and Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think to kick us off today, we want to learn a little bit about the folks who are attending. So if we jump down to the next slide, we're going to ask you to jump into that chat feature and just sort of let us know who you are, where you're from, and what brought you here today. If there's something specific that you're hoping to get out of this session, let us know so we make sure that we can cover it. And while people are kind of starting to put some of that information into the chat, I thought I would sort of reflect with the panelists about, we have had a lot of conversations around faculty support over the years, but there's been a huge uptick, I think, given the amount of change that's been happening in 2020, where people are really realizing they need a more strategic plan for this. I don't know if that reflects also your observations and what you guys have been seeing at schools and in the schools that you're working with.
Sure. Did you want us to reflect?
Yeah, comment on that while we see some folks coming in.
So, I think I have a unique opportunity or unique perspective at WGU. We've always been online. Our president has said we weren't built for a pandemic, but just so happens because our model is really focused and flexible and all online, we're able to continue operations in much the same way. That's not to say we haven't felt the impact in some ways, but not like I would have back when I worked at IUPUI with that, both a ground and online team. However, I think that that the way things have shifted, we still, even though our faculty has always worked online and always worked in remote locations, that need for support, just because of all of the change and the uncertainty, just of the environment around us in 2020, becomes even more important. So I think that community connection is vital, just to staying focused, to staying happy and healthy, to borrowing ideas from each other. So
yeah, absolutely, sort of amplifying that need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the lessons of the pandemic is the manner in which a lot of the shifts that took place on our campuses took place rather rapidly and in some cases without intention. We were just responding to crisis. And so I think the challenge going forward is to be more intentional about some of our new practices and think about the manner in which they connect to our mission and culture, as opposed to running around with our hair on fire, which is a lot of what's taken place in the spring and summer. And so hopefully we can get into what some of that intentionality looks like.
Yeah, that's great. And definitely seeing in the chat a lot of folks saying, I'm going to be online this fall, so how do I think about, staying connected, exactly what you guys are mentioning, or even I'm going to be in person this fall, but even in person, the amount of actual get-togethers that you can have and some of the face-to-face stuff you relied on is not available. So even in a face-to-face environment, virtual has a higher level of urgency in some ways. And definitely some questions, which I think we'll get to, about how do you balance connecting faculty, supporting them, but recognizing that they are super busy and even more so in this chaotic world, and like what's the relationship there that we want to support. So let's keep those in mind as we think through and answer some of the questions today. So let's move down to the first question from our panelists, which is, so faculty support, faculty community can be kind of a generalized term. What do you think are the main components? If thinking about having an intentional strategy, are there 2 or 3 main components that you think people should really focus on to get the most bang for their buck, so to speak? Richard, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think one wants to go back to the hiring process. We typically don't go back that far thinking about faculty support, but we really want to hire in support of your mission. There's such a strong sense of shared mission around student learning at Westminster. So as an expert in 20th century literature, I can have conversations with physics and business faculty. We have a lot to talk about because of that shared sense of mission. I think that should continue in the onboarding process. We have a 1-week new faculty orientation, and often, the support ends there, but we extend that support through the full year with a new faculty learning community, and they meet monthly around common topics, do a common read. A lot of really strong bonds grow up out of that incessant communication. All our faculty are assigned a mentor. So I think ideally a colleague who shares some commonality, maybe appointments in an interdisciplinary program, but then some differences too, maybe a scientist with a social scientist. So you can break down some of those walls, get different perspectives, expand your circle of colleagues. And then finally, I think a lot of year-end events that aren't framed explicitly as support, but have that covert outcome since they involve feelings of belonging and community among faculty.
Yeah.
Some of which is directed from students to faculty. We have a banquet at the end of the year where students give out goofy professor awards, like professor most likely to make a TikTok on a weekend. And that, that isn't explicitly support, but it feels like connection and community to faculty.
Yeah, sometimes those subtle things that you do to create, that are just sort of fun and lighthearted actually are major contributors to being able to feel connected and supported. Absolutely. And what was interesting about what you said, Richard, is kind of reflecting back on our earlier webinars, the tools and techniques you put in place for student support and community are not necessarily totally different than those that you would think of for faculty, right? And you can probably borrow a little bit from those strategies as you think about that implementation as well. Allison, what are you thinking?
I agree with Richard that the importance of mentors. I think particularly, again, when I was reflecting on how I might talk about this topic, WGU has always been so different. The faculty model, I won't go down the rabbit hole, but it is just completely different than any other place I've ever worked. So already we're structured by teams, we're nationwide, we're working from home. And so part of the support that WGU has built over the years is to organize our faculty into teams so that they have sort of a family, an automatic connection and mentors built into those teams. So I think that when I think about faculty support at WGU, I think about the ability to find natural mentors, but also that kind of structured mentorship. I also think about that they need feedback, not only from team members, just about how am I doing over here in my isolated little section? How am I impacting my learners? So feedback from team members, but also feedback, how are they impacting their students? So impact on their student feedback. So I think about that kind of faculty support, and I think that's relevant. So that's always been a part of what we do here, and it's always been important at WGU. But I think for anybody who's now working maybe suddenly either in very small groups in person or from home, that kind of isolation, that need for feedback and touch points, I think becomes even more important.
Gotcha. And we had a question come in the chat related, I think, to what both of you said, which is, WGU is so different and was from its origin. Do you think, how would you see implementing that teams approach in a more traditional environment? Do you think, and Richard, maybe you can reflect on that a little bit, just given, coming from a school that looks a little bit different from WGU.
Yeah, I mean, it partly depends on what you mean by a team. I mean, you can have a team in which there's very little community and connection. I think right, and one of the key features of putting together a team is that in some respects, administrators don't get to set the culture. So people like Allison and I don't get to determine what that community feels like, but we can certainly put into practice some kind of systemic changes that are going to support community. And I'm a big fan of retreats, virtual or in person, face-to-face, not about learning how to, the new safety procedures at the college, but a real retreat, which means going away, which is faculty driven, where faculty are talking peer-to-peer, where the outcomes are clear And that's sort of away from work kind of bonding, I think, really pays dividends for a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was it? I think the other thing that you both touched on, which I think is really important, is that it's not a one and done thing, right? That it's an ongoing, intentional strategy that you have to nurture throughout the school year and term over term to help it be successful. Let's jump to the next question, because I think this will relate also to some of the things I'm seeing in the chat, which is, so now that so many people are teaching and working at a distance, what are, and Richard, you mentioned the concept of a retreat, and Alison, you mentioned the concept of teams. I think other examples of how you help people connect, and then just like practically, how are they doing that? Are you using Zoom to do virtual retreats? Like, what could people think about incorporating to help succeed on some of those? Alison, why don't you kick us off this time?
Sure. So, so WGU is always just connected at a distance. That's what we've always done. Now, when we were able, and when we're able again, we do always come together in groups. So our faculty, each of our colleges have a summit each summer, typically, where they get in the room together. It almost feels like a conference, and I think that's a key to reconnecting. So now it's about thinking about, hopefully by next summer we'll be able to do that again, but we didn't do it this summer. Right now there were no massive virtual summits created, but is that something that we could implement, and how do we do it? We have our own tools. We don't use Zoom, we use some other, we have Teams, we have WebEx, but same concept, right? Mm-hmm. So when we can do it virtually, we do. Yeah. Also, the way that we're organized, we have, we try to build community in other ways. So it's not just about who are my other, business faculty colleagues, but who are my WGU colleagues in Indiana. So that's something that I actually can impact. And so just in the way that we're structured, we developed a long time ago, back 10 years ago, we developed a regular meeting for our Indiana faculty to come together, and it's virtual, and it's 30 minutes. It's a quick hit, but it is intended to, we recognize people's birthdays and work anniversaries, that really social, personal connection. And the people who join us, which are a large number each time, seem to really enjoy it and need that connection. And so then they get to know each other across functional teams, and they're able to connect for both work-related topics and just not, social-related, needs. Right. So that's another example. And we also do gatherings around the state too. So if I'm, again, when we can be in person, if I'm in a part of the state and I'm, meeting with a community leader, then I'm also inviting faculty and staff that live around that area to come meet, and people come out and they enjoy it, and it's a way for us to continue to build community. So those are some of the things that we've done, and we're thinking as a team about how do we continue to do that in a virtual way until we can do it in person again.
Right. So the point being, sometimes you're working at a distance, but you can still get together in person on occasion. Mm-hmm. Now's not like the best time for that, obviously, but in the long term, thinking through that, and then what are ways to replicate that in-person engagement today?
Right.
Richard, what are some of your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're a Teams campus, and I think Teams, it can be clunky, but I also think it's a great product in terms of gathering together affinity groups and having channels which allow for targeted discussions, much more efficient than email. Our faculty group that goes to the bar every Friday afternoon, they meet by Zoom now. So people are getting pretty adept at picking the right platform for the activity. I think on a higher level, thinking about mission, I mean, constant reminders about mission and how we're connected through that mission are super helpful, because culture, should flow from mission. And really utter clarity about goals of the work, so that employees have something specific to aim at. I think often our mission and goals go unstated, or they're simply assumed, which results in employees rowing in many different directions, or feeling disconnected from the larger organization, particularly if they're working remotely. incessant communication these days, so that people aren't tuning out, particularly during times of change when there's so much new information coming at faculty and they've not necessarily been involved in the decisions. So I've been emailing my faculty every week or two since March, basically same format, here are the changes, here's new information. Number 2, here's what's under discussion but not decided. Number 3, here's a resource that you might find helpful. It's very accessible. And 4, always finish with, I so appreciate the work you're doing. I understand the conditions under which you're doing it, and I'm here to help. You just let me know how I can support that work. And the usual sorts of things around transparency and giving faculty a say in decision making. That's never been more important.
Yeah, well, and I think that's sometimes people underappreciate how important just getting a weekly update can be, even if it's not decisive. Like to your point, we're still working on these things. We don't know the answer, but otherwise it can feel like things are happening in a vacuum and you're not in on it or in the know, so to speak. And we did have a question about how do I replicate the water cooler? And obviously that's very difficult to do online, but that is one way, which is sometimes that's how you hear about things, is in the hallway. And this is just a more intentional way of getting that information out, which I think is great. We did have, so we had a lot of great questions coming in from Martina and a few people giving her a shout out. So I want to touch on some of the things she's asking, which are kind of like really down to the practical level. When you're getting a virtual gathering together, any thoughts on how often people should be getting together, or how to structure that conversation? Should you have a topic? Should you have it be more open forum? What have you guys seen work?
I've seen both work, but I was just thinking as Richard was talking and then relevant to this question, one of the things that my immediate team has done since the start of, because I have a team that's not always remote, we sometimes worked in person. So one of the things that we did to replicate that water cooler is actually we have a weekly meeting called the water cooler, and it's in teams, and how often, I think you have to read your group, right? So we've tried some things where, like even with that statewide meeting I mentioned, we used to do it every week. Now we do it, ends up being twice a month. Because we were reading the room, and what people needed and wanted. And we sent out a survey and just said, here are your options. We just asked them, and we went with, obviously we're not going to please all the people, but we went with the average and, or the majority. But with that weekly water cooler thing, that's a smaller group. It's a more immediate work group that works together. And half of that hour tends to be structured. And the team runs it, by the way. They decide what they want to talk about and who they want to invite. So they'll invite a guest, they'll have a discussion, and then the last half is just the team talking with each other. That works for this particular team, but they worked that out together. We just created the space where it was, hey, how about we do this? And that it's, and then we gave it to them. I don't even go to that because I don't want, I have other opportunities to talk with my team, but I want that to be their chance to talk with each other, to ask questions to each other. And things have come out of that, other requests of the leadership, other ideas. So that's just one example. I don't know that fully answers the question.
That's great, but it also reiterates an important point, which is sometimes just ask people. Don't feel like you have to have all the answers going in, and not every situation and every set of faculty are going to be the same. So try something and then like get feedback and see if it worked, and if not, change it. And if so, great. You nailed it on the first try.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to change it when it is obvious it's not working the way that you thought it might. Right. If that's too often, then back off. If it's not often enough, then ramp it up. But I think you just have to put it out there and create the space, and then it starts to take shape.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Richard? Have you?
Well, I mean, I agree completely with Allison. I would say ask. That would be my answer, and of course listen. Then when you hear the responses, then if you ask and you hear something you don't like, that's the risk you take. But I think that's important that people feel heard. Yeah, great name for a new app, by the way, water cooler.
Right.
Someone wants to invent.
Got to trademark that, Allison, right now.
I don't have the time. Someone else can have it.
Awesome. Well, that's great. So let's jump down to the next. We're going to get our audience back involved here for a minute. And I think we've already touched on a few of these things, but I'd love to know from the folks who are attending, what barriers do you feel like you face in building community today, or that you anticipate as you try these strategies might be things that you'll have to overcome, or things that maybe we have some tips and tricks that we can share about how to navigate that. And one of the things that we hear a lot is time. Mm-hmm. So when you have a diverse faculty community, and the primary mechanism for building community and engagement are face-to-face activities, we hear a lot of times, especially adjunct faculty, for example, it's hard for them to navigate. They can't be there at that same time, or it feels like one more thing on their plate. And so we've done a lot of work with, for example, University of Missouri system, Arizona State University. In their case, they're leveraging InScribe, but the idea is create a community that's more on demand. So faculty can kind of drop in and out when they have a question or a challenge, or when they want to engage with somebody, and use that to supplement the face-to-face or the synchronous activities. So if you can't make it, maybe you can watch a recording, but there's always a place you can go sort of any time of day when you're in that moment and want to connect with somebody. I was just looking out. So we have a couple of folks that have said, yes, time is a challenge. One person saying, trying to figure out, and I think this kind of speaks to our next question, so maybe I'll hold on that one for a second, but yes, so time for faculty being pulled in many directions. So I don't know, Richard, Allison, how you think about getting faculty engaged. Are they required to attend some of these things? Are they all optional? And what's the incentive to pull them in?
It depends. So again, it depends on what the topic is, right? So if there's mission critical information, and the best way to share that with the team is through a virtual meeting, then it's required. If something like the water cooler, we haven't actually made that required, but everybody goes. And I think it's because it's driven by them and they're picking the topics. So I think that's one way to do it. Those are some initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's really thoughtful. And I kind of think about this question the way I do about mandatory service for students, which I just tend not to think is helpful, where students are accumulating points because they're required to do service. My approach is you make the programming meaningful enough that students want to attend, or the service opportunity is meaningful enough, and likewise for faculty, designing retreats or other team events that have real value to them, so that faculty are joining by choice. So they're going to be much more open to engaging in the conversations if they feel like there's real value for them, as opposed to many of our retreats or gatherings, unfortunately, where faculty are walking in with the arms crossed right from the beginning, suspicious about their time being wasted.
Yeah, good point. And that probably goes back to ask them what they want. Like, what do you need? What do you want to learn about? Like, Allison, you mentioned your water cooler the topics are all driven by the faculty themselves. So there's you can automatically see some value that you're gonna get out of that experience. So, and that probably just goes back to like making sure you have a mechanism to gather that information and feedback from faculty, whether it's formal surveys or a place where they can just go throw ideas out. Having that open forum sounds like an important component.
I think so. Just one quick thought about that. I think I'm seeing a lot of people talk about time and the complexity of managing everything that changes because of COVID, and just we're all busy anyway.
Right.
And I think the more that we can do to foster this, to simplify the process for connecting and gathering good information, because nothing is more frustrating than I have a question, or I need to bounce an idea off somebody. I don't know where to go to do that, or I'm free, but they're not. So any way that we can facilitate that, whether it be those regular gatherings or an asynchronous kind of connection where people can can chat when they're able to and respond when they're able to. I think those are other ways that we can really help support and build community in this climate.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to reiterate that idea of simplifying in this environment. It's so important. I was meeting with a faculty member at their year-end review. We're having our conversation, and one of their goals for next year, they wrote survival, and they meant it they meant it metaphorically, but also there was a undercurrent of, well, they meant literally too in the context of plague. And I wanted to honor that. I said, you know what, that seems totally reasonable. And I encourage the faculty member to, definitely put everything aside and focus on what's most important. And likewise in our own classes, this is a year to simplify and help students who also have so much on their plate, just manage what's around them.
Yes, yeah, and I've seen a couple of posts in the chat too, which is there's this idea of you have to support your faculty around their needs, professional development, changing landscape, but the faculty are also the front line for students oftentimes. So they're now being asked to be, mentor, advisor during this time of commotion and, helping to support them in that activity as well. I don't know if that's come up with your faculty as you're thinking through into the fall.
Absolutely, and of course this kind of advising burden, typically falls on faculty and women of color who already are being asked to carry that emotional work, and now it's just it's exacerbating that work for those members of our community who typically are called on, and it's that quiet work that often is unseen in terms of our systems around promotion and tenure.
Yeah, good, excellent point. So let's jump to the next question, because I think we had somebody post something that was relevant there as well. And that is, what shape does this community actually take? So one of our attendees, which is, I'm going to scroll up, James, mentioned, sometimes we want all the faculty together. Sometimes it's not relevant for everybody. It's really just like, do I teach math? And that's a good time to get together. So how do you guys think about the shapes of communities within or even outside your organizations? Richard, lead us off.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a super question. I mean, I think you can divvy up your faculty in a lot of different ways. I mean, your high and low performers, your early, mid, late career faculty, leaders, followers, early, late adopters of technology by academic unit. I mean, it's a super complex puzzle. And I often think we forget about the many shapes of our faculty. So I might focus on a challenge or two. One mistake is in imagining the loudest voices represent the majority of faculty. Yeah. Sometimes they're just those with the most privilege who feel authorized to speak out, whereas there's typically a much larger, quieter group that remains silent. And so I'm always interested in drawing out that group into conversation. And I think another mistake is trying to bring all faculty along to particular positions. Just like there's no way to keep everyone happy in an HOA or extended family. Not all faculty are going to be happy or feel part of the community, and that's okay. That's just human nature. Having said that, having just used the metaphor of a family, I'm also really suspicious of that metaphor that seeks to characterize workplace relationships in terms of family, because I think it's coercive and unhelpful in a lot of ways. So, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna, because we had a great question, which is, and I think people struggle with this with students as well. Those quiet voices are out there. How do you draw them out or give them a safe space where they feel like they can speak up?
Yeah, you explicitly call on them. You put them in safe positions where they can articulate those positions. You promote them. You put them in positions of power. You give them financial support for programming. It's not a magic bullet, but you acknowledge how valuable their work is and support that work.
Yeah, so not always a quick fix, right? Part of it is continuing to build that culture that allows for it, but knowing you have to be pretty intentional about making that happen.
And then in terms of your systems, make sure that your systems that are in place in terms of promotion tenure don't unnecessarily burden women, faculty of color. I mean, a good example are student evaluations. If those play a prominent role in tenure promotion, we just have to acknowledge that members of those communities are going to struggle on student evaluations because students are more comfortable. They feel authorized to use hateful language or comment on dress and appearance, things that have nothing to do with teaching and learning, just because they're conditioned that way. So we need to change that system.
Absolutely. And I think there was sort of a follow-up question about how do you identify the folks that are out there, and that's hard to do sometimes, but just going back to this idea of, you know, if you're surveying your faculty, if you're sort of proactively asking each of them for feedback, but in a way that can be anonymous or that other people are not necessarily having to see what they're saying, can start to open that dialogue and help you identify people, faculty in the community that have challenges, have concerns, but maybe aren't comfortable to stand up and say that in a room in front of, 40 of their peers.
I do worry about this a lot. I think it's an issue no matter what, but in this climate of, the one huge virtual meeting after another, I do think it's very easy for certain voices to get completely lost.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, if I had the solution to that just much like my water cooler app could make me a very successful one. But some of the things that I intentionally try to do with my own team is to create different types of connections, different size of gathering, to be intentional about one-on-one conversations, to reach out virtual, by teams, so that, because some people are more comfortable answering questions that way. So being mindful of the variety of ways that people need to have the opportunity to speak out. But gosh, I wish I knew the answer to that, because that's the kind of thing that when I think about faculty or staff that are quiet and their voices are lost, I could lose sleep at night over that. And it's the same thing with students. I often feel that the people that are getting the most attention and help are just those that are the best at seeking it for themselves, but maybe not the ones who need it the most. And so it's a great question to ponder, but I do think one of the answers is offering a variety of ways to connect. And I do think that mentorship is a huge key to that. So if you can recognize those powerful mentors on your team, they often can be the ones who draw out the quieter voices and can lift them up and encourage them to be more vocal. So I don't know if that's helpful, but those are some thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, because sometimes you just need that. Like, you need to start small with like one connection and one relationship that helps give you the confidence or the nudge that you need to get out there and say what you're thinking. Mm-hmm. We've also found, some of the folks that are building faculty communities that we are working with will create spaces for faculty to sort of self-form the groups. So there's one big community, but within that community, they can create their own subgroups and kind of find each other. And you can learn a lot from the types of groups that faculty self-form, just to understand. It tells you a lot about how they think about their own identity and how they, like what they think of as their specialties and focuses outside of maybe the subject that they're teaching. So that would just be one of the recommendations just from some of the folks we've worked with that has worked. Okay, let's go on to our next question. All right, so the big one that we've been talking around here. So, change is always happening in higher education. Some would say that the pandemic has accelerated that change. It certainly hit the accelerator for a certain number of changes to hit. That doesn't necessarily mean all the changes that we're incorporating today are long-term. So curious if you have some thoughts on things that you do think will kind of just find their way into the experience ongoing. And specifically for this fall, how do we help faculty embrace that change, feel confident and comfortable with it, and feel ready to teach, in the 2021 school year? Allison, take it away.
So first, how will this change, make change permanent? Was that the first part of that question?
Yeah. What do you think is going to stick around?
So So, you know, I think coming from where we are at WGU, like I think that in some ways it's kind of validated what we've already been, not kind of, it has validated what we've been doing all along, which is that you focus on quality experience for the students, that a very student-centered, flexible experience. And I think that more institutions will do that because they have to now, and then see the value of it and stick with it. So I think that kind of change will happen. What I hope that people start to see and understand that online education can happen in a lot of different ways, and it's not just about taking that classroom experience and plopping it in an online meeting room, that there are lots of different ways to interact with learners online, and that perhaps that you know, daily meeting at this time for this long is maybe not the way to do it for all different subjects. So I'd love to see that change continue. How can community help to embrace change? I think anytime things change, and when they change particularly because of outside forces, and it's not something we drove ourselves, I think that creates a feeling of sort of panic and insecurity. And I know, just speaking as a human being, one of the things that I do when I'm feeling panicked and insecure and unsure is I seek people that I trust, as sounding boards for ideas, for support. So I think the more that we can help our faculty to find each other and feel safe connecting with each other for that kind of sounding board, that mentorship, then that just makes the change feel better. It also makes it happen more effectively. So
it's really like nurturing that social emotional component of change, which is, you know, not necessarily about the change itself, but more about the emotions and the uncertainty that surround it, and creating a network.
I think that's a piece of it, though. I also think that there's a lot of idea sharing too, right? There's a lot of, like, I tried this and it worked, or I'm thinking about trying this, what do you think? And so there's resource and idea sharing, as well as the social and emotional piece of it. So I think both are important, and I think the more that we can foster that connection and conversation among faculty members, the more, you know, the part of effective change management is raising the awareness around, like, the need for the change. So if you've got people talking to each other, and you've got this faculty member who's feeling really good about it and understanding it, and they can bring along this one who's like not as sure, then it's going to happen in a more, that change is going to happen more effectively, and everybody's going to feel better as it happens.
Yes. Yeah. So it's almost like they're reinforcing each other. So if there are changes that you want to persist, like adapting new technologies, and part of the way that you make that successful, to your point, is by having faculty be able to share best practices and talk about how they're using it and learn from each other. Otherwise, at the end of the day, we might just end up throwing it all away again and back to where we were to start.
Right.
Richard, what do you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the question institutions need to ask themselves is, who owns change during times of crisis? It's not a question that gets asked that often. You know, I'm reading Rebecca Solnit's super interesting book called Paradise Built in Hell, which I recommend. The thesis focuses on the opportunity that can come from massive disasters like the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. And basically, you know, Solnit's arguing that there's always a hunger for community because we're human beings, and we thrive when we're with others. But ironically, disasters like 9/11, Katrina, the San Francisco earthquake, they satisfy that hunger as people come together to overcome calamity. And it's one of the reasons so many people find meaning and common purpose in going to war. And it's been one of the failings of our national response to the coronavirus crisis, actually, that we don't feel a common sense of purpose. One of Solnit's cautionary notes is that the source of community is rarely those in positions of authority, so like me and Allison. In fact, authority figures tend to be disruptors to community that's developed organically in crisis. So, I mean, I'm amazed by the collaboration amongst our faculty working in the middle of this crisis. The the sharing around ideas, around pedagogy, preparing for this term through really generative conversations around innovation, workshops run almost exclusively by faculty, talking about technology. So, you know, I'm somewhat optimistic actually that hopefully these ways of doing our work will continue.
That's interesting. So 2 important points there. One is, don't presume that this isn't already happening at your institution, and then squash it by trying to implement on top, right?
Yes.
So try and figure out, and if there are successful things, either stay out of the way or ask, you know, what can I do to help nurture this and help you be more successful. And I also, we did a panel right when we were in the midst of it in the spring on a similar topic. And much like you mentioned, Richard, it was seeing the amount of collaboration that naturally sprung up, not even just within institutions, but across institutions, and the amount of information sharing and just generosity that people had to help each other through the process was really inspiring. And I agree, I hope something that, you know, always existed in pockets, but maybe can be more at the forefront of how we do business.
Yeah, in San Francisco in 1906, the authorities set fire breaks, which had the unfortunate outcome of burning down more of the city than helping. So, you know, we don't want to act in that sort of manner at our own campuses.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we want to open it up, I don't know if we have any questions that have come in through the chat that we didn't capture. And Danielle, if you want to jump in and help us navigate that, we can jump down to the next slide. There we go. Awesome. So attendees, other questions that you might have, or things that if you did post it in the chat and we missed it, we'll try and grab it, but feel free to repost, please, so that we don't miss out on get into any of your hot topics. Danielle?
Yeah, so we don't actually have any questions in the chat at this point that we haven't covered.
Oh, great. Wow, we were very productive in scoping through the chat, so that's good for us. The nitty-gritty of learning groups. So give us a little bit more around that, Rhea. Learning groups leading groups. So I think kind of going back to the idea of, you've got a group of people together, and how do you lead them in conversation or discussion? How do you get everybody to start talking and participating? Do you have any sort of practical icebreakers or tips that you use that have helped in the past?
Here's a key that I think a lot of people, and we even are guilty of it at WGU a lot, is just have everybody introduce themselves. Especially if it's a small group, right? Sometimes you can't, but giving people an opportunity to just say who they are breaks the ice. And so if you can do that, sometimes when my groups are larger, it's just give me one word, and I can give them one word descriptor of your mood, or what, depending on what the conversation's going to be. So that can be a quick hit for everybody to get their, and I say everybody turns their camera on.
Zoom, yeah.
That's when you're doing a virtual meeting, I think cameras on is huge. It keeps people they don't feel as free to multitask. You know, and there's pushback on that, and I understand it, but I just think it's too important. If we were going to be in the room with each other, we'd have to look at each other's faces. So,
right.
So there's a couple of things, but I also just think that as a leader of the conversation, you have to go in with a plan. You can't, you've got to have some sort of a structure and have a plan for how you will ask individuals to participate, and don't just rely on that person who feels real comfortable speaking up, but invite people to participate and get super comfortable with silence. We don't wait long enough as speakers. And sometimes, especially in this virtual environment, there's the technology. Sometimes you're double muted and you don't realize it. You have to give people time to get their thoughts together and then get their technology in order so that they can participate. I think that there are lots of other things like using chat is a great way to get people to participate that wouldn't participate otherwise. And there's most of the different technologies have polling or, you know, something like that. So I think getting ready with some polls and having people participate in that way have all been effective.
That's great.
Yeah, love the point about silence. Couldn't agree more. Breakout rooms, you know, we want to take the best lessons of active learning and apply them to our meetings, and, you know, virtual or face-to-face. And people really open up when they're in groups of 3 and 4. I'm a big fan of calling on people who are quiet. And much harder, I think, is not routing the conversation through the leader of the meeting and trying to get some peer-to-peer conversation that tends to be more generative, if possible.
Yeah, and it reminds me a little bit of some of like the workshops that you'll sometimes do at conferences, where they'll put you in groups and then they'll ask you to reflect on something, and then you have to report back to everybody, you know, what it is that you did. Some of the same active learning techniques that we use in the classroom can absolutely be applied when we're trying to help our faculty figure out how to engage and how to lead them in discussion as well.
And Katie, your point about just low stakes, intentional reflection, that's super generative. I have all my faculty do at the end of the semester an intentional reflection. All the classes in the Honors College are team taught. And so the faculty engage in a low stakes formative exercise where they're simply asked to answer 3 questions. What went really well? What didn't go as well as you thought it should? And what are your plans for next time you teach the course that might be different? And it's not tied to evaluation. It's just to facilitate conversation, honest conversation between the 2 partners. And the partners, if they teach again, tend to go back to that document and build the class from there.
That's great. And that same structure can be applied, you know, to all kinds of things, right? Yes. Like what worked, what didn't work, how do we want to improve it next time? And that's a great suggestion, Richard, and a super simple pen and paper way to help people think about and raise their voice about what they're thinking about. So it doesn't look like, I don't think I've seen any other questions pop in. So once again, great job, panelists, getting through the questions as we were talking. So if we just jump to the last slide here. So first I want to thank Richard and Allison. So great to have you guys here sharing your expertise and helping to, you know, address some of the challenges and questions for our attendees today. Also, big thanks to WGU Labs for helping us put this on. If you want to learn more about WGU Labs or InScribe, you can follow us on social. You can also check out our website, which I think someone will drop in the chat. But we would love for you to reach out to us, share what you learned today with your followers and friends. And again, this is a community itself, and we are all learning from each other. So thank you to all of our attendees for sharing what you did today and for being here. I will also let you know we'll follow up this webinar again with the recording, as well as some links to our previous webinars, if those would be useful to you. And we at InScribe just recently put together an institutional assessment to help you think through how your institution is building community for students and faculty. So we will give you an exclusive link to that assessment in our follow-up email. And hopefully it will have some great tips for you as you think about, you know, what that means to you today and going forward into the fall. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. And everyone have a wonderful day and a great fall semester.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.